Lord and Savior. Amen. And now let us together sum the words up that our Lord himself has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all now and forevermore. Amen.
The Senate is now in session.
Somebody give me out first. I say somebody give me out first. Yeah.
I should explain that Senator Rogers led us in prayer because Madam Saab sent word this morning that unfortunately he couldn't be with us.
Any other activities? Anyone, sir?
Yeah, we about that. Let me say, Senate.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General.
I am to advise that I received a message, Her Excellency, dated the 18th of April 2019, and it reads as follows. Her Excellency the Governor General to the Honorable the Senate. Her Excellency the Governor General has the honor to inform the Honorable the Senate that she will be absent from the country during the period 23rd of April 2019, the 11th of May 2019 on vacation leave. Her Excellency further has the honor to inform the Honorable the Senate that in accordance with the provisions of Section 29(1)(a) of the Constitution, Sir Kenneth Rudolph Hewitt, K.A.C.B.E., BJH, will perform the functions of the Office of Governor General for the period of Her Excellency's absence. Well, the communication relates to events past, but it was important that I put it on the record that she did right, and I take it that she's now back in office.
Announcements by Your Honor the President.
Yes. I have to advise that I have heard from Senator Adams, who is away from the country on business and will not be able to join us today. I've also heard from Senator Grant that he will join us later. And Senator Walcott is returning to the island later today and may or may not join us. I think I also heard from Senator Nurse, and I think that he's traveling and to that extent will not be with us today.
Minutes.
Yes, advised that we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of March 2019, and we have a motion for the confirmation, but we are in receipt of those minutes.
President, I'd like to move that the minutes of March 26, 2019 and Wednesday, April 3rd, 2019
Both sets of minutes?
be confirmed.
Yes. So the question is that the minutes of the 23rd of April 2019 and also the minutes of
26th of March and the 3rd of April. 26th of March
as
and
well as the
the
minutes of the 26th of March be now confirmed.
3rd of April. And the 3rd of April.
Yes, sir. My note only spoke to one, so let's get it right.
26th of March and 3rd.
I'll put the question again. The minutes of
Tuesday, the 26th of March,
Tuesday, 26th of
2019.
March,
And Wednesday, the 3rd of April.
3rd of April. Only the two of them?
Only total.
Yes. Sorry about that. My minutes only spoke of my note of 26th of March. The question is that the minutes of Tuesday, the 26th of March and of April 3rd should be circulated. We now confirm. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. The minutes indicated for the two occasions are now confirmed.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following: the Proceeds of Crime Amendment Order 2019, the Immigration Automated Passport Control Kiosk Regulations 2019, the Customs Amendment Regulations 2019, the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation Annual Report 2016 to 2017, the Barbados National Oil Company Limited's Annual Report and Audited Financial Statements 2015, and the Fair Trading Commission Annual Report 2018.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate, and moved by minister.
Mr. President, I'd like to move that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the remainder of today's sitting, which would allow this honorable House to complete Orders 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 in all of their stages.
The question is that Standing Order 45-2 be suspended for the rest of the day's sitting and for the reasons indicated by the acting leader of the House, Senator McConney. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. We can now proceed to deal with all those matters in all the stages today. I think there are 5 of them.
Introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the Public Service Retrenchment Workers Bill 2019. I also beg to give notice of the following resolution: to approve under Section 5 of the Land Acquisition Act, Cap 228, the compulsory acquisition by the Crown of a parcel of land situated at Lower Bay Street in the parish of St. Michael in this island for the public purpose, namely tourism development. Mr. President, I wish to give notice of the first reading of the following. I move the first reading of the following: the Charities Amendment Bill 2019, the Companies Amendment Bill 2019. The Corporate Trust Services Providers Amendment Bill 2019. The Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill 2019. The Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2019. The Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Amendment Bill 2019. The National Council on Substance Abuse Amendment Bill 2019, and the Data Protection Bill 2019. And the Public Service Retrenchment Bill, Amendment Bill 2019.
It is that the bills so identified by the Honorable Leader of the Senate be now read for the first time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and the bills identified by the Honorable Leader now being read for the first time.
Public business. Order number 1, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Charities Amendment Bill 2018.
Mr. President, before we go to debate, I beg the permission of this House to treat orders 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 as a cognate debate because of the close interrelationship of these matters as it relates to the Financial Action Task Force, and Barbados's need to comply and to make adjustments in all of these areas in support of our commitment.
1, 2, 5, and 6.
Yes, Mr. 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6.
The question is that the measures on the public business identified by the acting leader of the Senate, items 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, be debated together, treated as a cognate debate. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it, and you may please proceed.
Mr. President, thank you. This cognate debate will allow this honorable House to debate the Charities Amendment Bill 2019, the Companies Amendment Bill 2019, the Corporate Trust Service Providers Amendment Bill 2019, the Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill 2019, the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2019. These bills are related, as I would have mentioned, because they all address Barbados's need to raise to acceptable international standards, and I may also say to best practices or better practices, our laws, our regulations, and other measures that pertain to money laundering, funding terrorism, and other activities, nefarious activities. Our action as a country or failure to act, Mr. President, will impact not only the perceived integrity of our local financial system, but our regional and our global relationships with banks, with insurance companies, with financial institutions, and other countries that are operating in the same shared financial space. The potential fallout, Mr. President, then for businesses and individuals of this country alike could be significant should we choose not to act at this stage. And I would say, if I were to break it down, that there's simple transactions like wiring and transferring money and receiving money for business transactions, even opening a bank account, could become increasingly cumbersome if our financial jurisdiction here in Barbados is considered suspect or uncooperative in seeking to improve the environment for financial management. As I open this debate, Mr. President, I want to share what brings us here now and what makes it urgent for us to act at this time. The Financial Action Task Force commenced a one-year observation period of Barbados' anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism regime in June last year. Barbados was placed under the enhanced follow-up process based on results of a report that was laid November 17, was adopted here as part of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force in Grenada, in Guyana. Now, that report, Barbados would have been assessed back in 2016. And the assessment was a mutual evaluation. And what is that? It was a very thorough and a very intensive process that evaluates the integrity of Barbados's financial system and of our compliance with recommendations, and there were about 40 of them, of the Financial Action Task Force. And this evaluation was done by peers of Barbados. When we say peers, there was a peer review as in the Caribbean region. And out of that came a report which was, as I said, adopted in Guyana in November of 2017. As a result, Barbados had a very poor ranking in many of the areas where for money laundering and terrorism. And it was made clear that there were certain adjustments that had to be made in our legislation and in our regulations and in some of the operational measures we had in place in order to bring us up to scratch and up to a standard that would significantly improve the trust, the respect, and the compliance of Barbados with several regulations and laws. The Charities Act, which is the principal act seeking to be amended, that we're seeking to have amended today, was one of those pieces of legislation that was cited for improvement. That act, in very simple terms, when it came to the information that was being sought from persons who were applying as trustees for charities, that information was rather slight and did not give the level of detail or transparency that was deemed to be acceptable to ensure that persons who were up to no good couldn't hide behind charities and use those charities to funnel or channel illegal, ill-gotten gains or monies received illegally, or to hide money that they had from the authorities, the regulatory authorities. And so it was recommended that the Charities Act be amended, and this bill seeks to do so in a number of different ways, and I will highlight just a few. One being the definition of prominent public office in the Act, as well as politically exposed persons. Now, in the past, politically exposed persons were not treated in the same way in terms of request for disclosure of information, more information, disclosure about whether or not they were a head of state, they were a judicial officer, a permanent secretary, a minister, a chief executive officer, or a director of a board of a state-owned enterprise, and whether or not this trustee was in fact a person who had held prominent office in an international organization even. So it did not just relate to whether or not this trustee would have been a prominent political person in government, but it is also in international organizations. And so as the data collection for these Charity Amendment Act, we are now seeking through this bill to amend the level of detail and level of disclosure that is required. That is similarly so for the Companies Amendment Bill, where we are seeking to ensure that beneficial ownership of companies is more transparent. So beneficial ownership, whether you own or you exercise ultimate control over a company, that was a bit of information that was not as easily discernible from the applications for the companies, under the Companies Act, which we are now seeking to amend, the Principal Act, which we're seeking to amend. Also, not only speaking of beneficial ownership, but beneficial interests, where if you had ownership through a trustee, through a legal representative, through an agent, or through some other intermediary, that was not obvious either. And this bill will seek to bring greater transparency to that. It also seeks to make sure that whether the business is an incorporated entity or simply a registered entity in Barbados, there will still be that high level of disclosure required to ensure transparency in the beneficial owners. There's also a proposal for specifics about filing a return as a company, where it must be now done annually, must be done timely, and there is now a prescribed format. And the Companies Amendment regulations have been changed, where there's now a new annual return form number 35 that includes the requirement for the levels of disclosure that are much higher than what was required earlier. The Financial Services Commission Amendment Bill 2019. Now, when Barbados was preparing for its assessment of the financial sector, which was sponsored by the World Bank and IMF, this was back in 2014, one of the Principal Act, which is the Financial Services Commission Act 2010-21, was one of those acts that was identified for significant amendment. It was intended that we would strengthen the provisions for regulation and supervision, that we would bring the Financial Services Commission into greater compliance with some of the core principles of international bodies, including the International Organization of Security Commissions, the International Organization of Pension Supervisors, and the Basel Accord. Now, back in 2014, Barbados was told that we needed to make significant changes to the Principal Financial Services Commission Act. The former administration would have started some of that work, but it was left incomplete. And so when we were assessed in 2016, when Barbados was evaluated for the integrity of its financial services in 2016, it was an evaluation sponsored by the IMF and the World Bank. That work that was left undone contributed to Barbados having quite a poor showing. It is with this bill and the amendments contained therein that we are now seeking to complete the work that was undone and to restore this country's reputation, as our poor rating had indeed impacted our reputation. Among the proposed amendments for this bill is where there is a change in shareholder, the Financial Service Commission must be informed. And where financial institutions now must provide a list of shareholders who hold shares valued at 5% or more of its stated capital. This bill also provides that an individual who wants to acquire or hold shares that are valued at more than 10% of the share capital of an entity must not just inform, but must get permission in order to acquire those shares. Now, this is an international best practice, and you will see it reflected in a number of different statutes around the world for those who are seeking to raise the level of their compliance and the level of their best practice with regards to money laundering and funding of terrorism. Part of this bill also made for anomalies that existed within the Principal Act to be corrected. For example, that whole act still refers to the Commissioner of Inland Revenue, and we know that that has already been changed, and that would now be the Revenue Commissioner of the Barbados Revenue Authority. This bill also seeks to regularize certain practices that they were practices, but they were not captured within the statute. For example, where the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs served as an ex officio member on the Financial Services Commission Board, but this bill now seeks to bring that into the law and make it more significant than it was before. Now, Mr. President, the Financial Services Commission must be aware, it must be empowered, and it must be constantly looking at who is controlling companies and hold the wealth interests of Barbadians, and who is using our jurisdiction for financial purposes. And this is how we protect Barbados's interests and our reputation as a jurisdiction of recognized financial integrity. And the amendments, therefore, to the Financial Services Commission, the Principal Act, it is with this in mind that this bill makes these proposals. The Corporate Trust Service Providers Amendment Bill 2019. The amendments that are proposed in this bill seeks to broaden the powers of the director to issue guidelines which would include the detection and the prevention of money laundering and the financing of terrorism in Barbados. And it sets out what are the specific areas where those guidelines would be impacted under this new bill. For the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention and Control Amendment Bill 2019, it seeks to clarify certain definitions, including the definition of criminal conduct, which helping us to understand that that conduct is whether or not it would constitute an offense in Barbados or would constitute an offense if it occurred in Barbados. So, for example, even if it had occurred outside of Barbados but would have constituted an offense in Barbados, it would certainly fall within the definition of criminal conduct. It seeks to replace unlawful activity with unlawful conduct, which indeed broadens, and it more conforms with the proceeds and instrumentalities of crime bill, so there's greater alignment in that regard. It seeks to strengthen the obligation of financial institutions to report certain transactions in a timely manner, and it seeks to address the ability to disseminate information to public authorities and to requesting authorities with regards to money laundering and funding of terrorism and suspected situations in those regards. So there are several bills, 5 bills that relate to Barbados's obligation under its commitments to, 1, follow the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force and to promote their implementation in the country, and also to undergo a process of review, such as we have done through mutual evaluation, through peer reviews, and also to participate in any follow-up process to that. Now, Barbados is required at the end of May to report to the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force on the progress we have made with regards to making the legislative changes and other adjustments that we were required to make in our jurisdiction. It is important that we report well and report significant progress come the end of May in Trinidad, when the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force will meet and when Barbados will present its progress report. And certainly, I believe that these bills together are moving Barbados in the right direction, and I invite the Honorable House to debate these bills with a zeal and an excitement that certainly connects to the urgency that Barbados has to make sure that we continue to put these in place and move in the right direction towards a very good reporting and representation of our intention to the international financial community. With these few words, I beg to move that this bill be read the second time.
Question is that the bills under discussion be now read a second time. I recognize Senator Riggs. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and afternoon to the Chamber. I want to thank the acting leader of government business today for her introductory remarks and a thorough presentation of the changes that need to be made in respect to the suite of legislation that we have in front of us as it relates to becoming compliant to the Financial Action Task Force recommendations and based on the review that we had in 2016. So these pieces of legislation are very similar to a scenario that we had recently in this honorable chamber. The context may be a bit different because we're now speaking about a regional context, but it reminds me very much of the situation we found ourselves in as it related to legislation that we had to change in relation to the international business sector and changing our corporation tax to be compliant with the OECD base erosion and profit shifting initiative. In that vein, after we changed the legislation to become compliant, and after that we found ourselves in a very precarious situation where the EU then blacklisted us. And it is in that context I'd like to make a contribution this morning, particularly to the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Amendment, to ask a few questions and to make us very cognizant of the things that we change and the impact that they have. the leader of government business spoke to a review that happened in 2016, and we were largely not compliant with a lot of the recommendations that came from the Financial Action Task Force. I found a report that spoke to our ranking, however, in 2014. And what stood out for me in that report, and that was by the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, as it relates to Barbados' ranking, was we were compliant and largely compliant to 2 out of 6 of the core recommendations, meaning we were partially compliant and non-compliant to 4 out of 6 of the core recommendations. And then for the key recommendations, only 3 out of 10 were we compliant and largely compliant, meaning that 7 out of 10 we were partially compliant and not compliant. So when I receive legislation that seeks to amend a suite of legislation, my question becomes, are we moving in a direction that actually means that we increase our compliance statistically? Will we move from 2 out of 6 of the core recommendations to being now compliant to 4 out of 6? Because a lot of the times we may change legislation and it may seem as though we're moving in a direction. When it comes to being ranked and assessed, the proof is in the numbers and the actual ranking that we hold after the suite of legislation has been passed. So that is one of the questions that I would like to pose this morning as it relates to the suite of legislation. The other thing that I want to make mention of is we seem to also be looking at the financial risk that money laundering poses. One of the things that I also found in that report from ECLA was that there's some major sources or conduits for money laundering and the financing of terrorism. One was the traditional banking sector. A lot of money is funded through the banking sector from unscrupulous places and businesses and so-called washed in the traditional banking sector. One of the other conduits are casinos. Casinos are found to be major conduits of money laundering. And in reading that, it also prompted me to remember that in March of this year, the word casino wasn't mentioned, but in our budget, we did also speak to a request from the government, noted that there were many requests from investors to include in our tourism sector to extend the presence of gaming tables and machines in private businesses, and that it was a source of high-end mega investment. So today we're trying to be compliant with money laundering and financing terrorism initiatives. However, it seems to me that in the very near future, possibly, we are looking at the possibility of opening casinos in Barbados, which is a conduit for money laundering. So I'm just wondering if we're working with a double-edged sword here. On one hand, our regulations and our oversight are seeking to reduce our vulnerability, but the investment that is coming to Barbados and the type of investment then further increases our vulnerability for the said things that we're trying to address. So that is one of the things that also prompted me this morning as it relates to the money laundering and financing of terrorism bill. Mr. President, I also want to make mention of the Charities Amendment Bill. Being a member of a non-profit organization, not a charitable organization, they're two different things legally. I had the painstaking experience of trying to register that organization. So I looked through the Charities Amendment Bill with great detail, and I want to make three points, or I want to highlight 3 points. So the amendment for the Charities Bill seeks to make the application of registration for the Board of Trustees easier. What it also does is it includes, as the acting leader of government business says, is to include the definition of prominent public office, which is both for local and international persons. And as I suspected, this was to track or try to have oversight over persons who would use charities in a way that is less than desirable in terms of the hiding of money or even tax evasion. A lot of persons around the world use charities for tax evasion purposes. But nonetheless, that change or the amendment seeking to close that loophole is reflected in Clause 4, which speaks to Part 3 of the Act. Now what we're seeking to do is to delete Section 9 of the Principal Act, which states, every application shall be in the form prescribed in the second schedule or to the like effect, and shall be signed by the majority of trustees. That is what we're deleting. And we're replacing it with every application respecting trustees of a charity to be incorporated as a board shall be in the form 2 prescribed in the second schedule and shall be signed by the majority of the trustees. I know legislation cannot be extremely detailed in some instances, but if the aim is to provide greater oversight over charitable organizations and those involved in them, some guidance should be given to what is meant by the majority of trustees. If you have 9 trustees, 5 persons signing could be considered a majority. But who is dictating that guidance? The charity is deciding that. I'm hearing on the asides. Okay. If no definition or guidance is given to a majority, and you're seeking to find out those persons who hold prominent positions, who have a high net worth, possibly, could be excluded from those persons who are signing the registration. It may be an area of convenience, but it could also be a loophole. But then if you say no, we are explicitly asking all trustees to outline in Form 1, I believe it is. I don't have the document on me. In Form 1. There are explicit mandatory fields that need to be filled out now in Form 1 for all trustees. However, if that is the argument, in Form 2, Section 7, it also states now, please give details of any applicant, trustee, officer, or beneficiary who holds or has held prominent public office. It says give a description. The word there is description. I have detail. Description. After that line, Mr. President, the form is blank. So it is left up to the person filling out the form to describe those persons. If your first language isn't English, what is the description? your ethnicity, your age, your name, where you work, your occupation. What I would have actually liked to see, or if you're saying you want greater detail on persons who have held public or who hold public office, would have been mandatory fields of the information that you're seeking to find out from these persons. For instance, last name, first name must be mandatory. Your marital status, your current occupation, the position held as it relates to being in the public office, along with any other occupations that you currently hold, the tenure of holding that public office, and which organization, because now you're asking both international and local persons to fill out the form, leaving a blank section there asking to describe those persons. Because remember, in Form 1, you've only asked trustees to give certain details. Now you're asking for applicants, trustees, officers, or beneficiaries. What would also be good information to collect in terms of data management would be a mandatory field as well in relation to who is it? Is it an applicant and a beneficiary that has held the public office? So, sir, what I'm trying to say is that in trying to garner more information, you've also introduced a very large level of ambiguity in the form. If the aim of the bill is to make the application of registration for the Board of Trustees easier, there has to be some form of mandatory fields in that form going forward, because it also states, because we're changing it, that this must be the form that they fill out. The Principal Act has prescribed in the second schedule or to the like effect. So it could have been that form or a similar form. Now we're saying it has to be this form that these persons fill out. So, sir, for me, I think we need to be a bit more explicit in the type of data that we're asking people to provide in terms of the registration process, because what this also does is it leaves it up to subjectivity. And that can then cause the back and forth in the registration process. So I'm just asking if the point of all of this is to make the registration easier, if greater detail or mandatory fields should not be included in the form, as I've just mentioned. Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you. I next recognize Senator Franklin.
Very much, Mr. President. My usual refrain: government has to stop behaving like this. These bills were sent to us. I don't know which one was coming, whether they were coming. We were off for 4 weeks. This is going to be week 5. I had no idea what to prepare for or when to prepare for. Then I found out this morning that we're going to be doing several bills in one. It is not fair. The government side has all the information, and it is unfair to the opposition to be getting it hours or even days before the actual debate. That said, I want to have that on the record because I will put it on the record every time. This government is rushing to do things quickly without having regard for anybody else. Like they don't care about a fella. I have very few comments to make on this particular bill. And I'm going to start, sir, with the definition of prominent public office. And at paragraph D, it says, a minister, a member of the House of Assembly, or a senator. What does that mean? because a minister can only be a member of the House or a member of the Senate. In Barbados, that is. So are we saying that a minister who must be a member of the House or a member of the Senate, that is nonsense. That we rush and do these things and without even like reading them back, because that's the first thing that struck me. Or unless you mean that every minister or then member of the House, whether you're a minister or not, are members of the Senate. That does not come out in the definition, but who knows what the government is doing, right? The annual returns, and this is a tricky thing here. I'm happy to see that the government is insisting on annual returns to make people compliant. Let me see what the companies are doing. And that's what strikes me, that the government is putting in place provisions for annual returns for companies in Barbados, but it will seek to do business with companies outside of Barbados that fail to file their annual returns with other corporate registries, let's say in the United Kingdom. Because this thing with White Oak Advisory, I have in my possession a copy of a letter from the office, the office in England, saying that they will strike off White Oak Advisory if they fail to file their annual returns. We ain't doing our due diligence. No, this bill would force, if people want to deal with us in Barbados, they would have to do their due diligence and they would have to have this information. But the government jumped into bed with a company who they know nothing about, that the corporate office in England knows nothing about. That is the problem I have. And we are spending all of our money trying to enforce, making a company that is registered outside of Barbados, that is failing to comply with the laws of England, that is registered in England, but we want to put those same laws in place for Barbados. That is hypocrisy. I do not understand. You see, we rush and do things. And when we do these things, we hope that it happens, but don't notice. This company should be operating in Barbados. Fly-by-night company. That is, and mind you, it was in a situation where it would have been struck off in England in 2018. While that is happening, we are bringing them to Barbados and giving them contracts, or giving them a contract 3 or 4 days after the government was in place, without the necessary due diligence. We don't know what in Barbados knew who White Oak was. Maybe 1 or 2, but they didn't tell us. And there were 2 people. White Oaks in the big thing is 2 people. They promised the opposition that we will get the opportunity to interview White Oaks when they come back to Barbados. They come on the left, they come on the right, and they never told the opposition anything. We had that assurance from the Prime Minister that they would allow the opposition and his 2 senators to speak to White Oak. Right? We haven't gotten that chance yet. I know we've discovered in England, from the newspapers in England, that it is a scam. And we are allowing this country to be fleeced by charlatans. No, with the headlines. Don't even try to distract me about that. No, come on, Mr. President, protect me from this nonsense that is happening. I am saying, why I link White Oak to this thing. We are putting in place laws that say the companies in Barbados must do certain things with its international best practice. And we are dealing with a company that is registered outside of Barbados that failed. A company that fails to do what we are insisting that Barbados companies must do.
Senator, may I just inquire, are you quoting from a document which is not before us?
I'm not quoting from any document, sir. I'm quoting from this, my hard drive.
No, I saw that the outset that you had referred to an article which appeared somewhere outside of Barbados, which you are relaying.
I'm not saying I'm relying
I'm
on.
only saying that if that is so, You should pay us the respect
I
of
said,
sharing
sir, I have in my possession a document from the corporate office in England that threatened to strike off White Oak
The mistake made is that it was a respect to that article
because,
being published in England, but it was not circulated.
no, this is not it. This
I don't
is
know
not
why
it.
now.
Just trying to strike off White Oak because I can make the document available to you, but I have to print it out. If you want it, I will give it to
It
you.
is not that whether I want it, I think that honorable members are entitled to see the information on which you're relayed for the criticisms you're making.
Sir, I will make the document available to the Senate. I will print it out and I will give it to the Senate because it is right now in
Mr.
in
President.
electronic form.
I raise on a point of order. Mr. President, the honorable member is quoting from something that he has somewhere. He said it, his hard drive or some kind of drive, I don't know. Wherever it is, he has it. But this document has not been made available to this honorable chamber, Mr. President. So I do not know how we can sit here and continue with this discourse. As a matter of fact, Mr. President, this discourse is not on the bills before this honorable chamber. And it seems that once again, my colleague, Mr. President, has gone off on some tangent. Now, we really, Mr. President, I object strenuously to someone quoting from something that no one has seen. He has not even identified properly what he's quoting from. And so I'm asking you, Mr. President, not to allow this chamber to be used for people's flying of kites. Easter is long gone. Thank you.
Mr. President, I said I have in my possession a document that suggests that White Oak was not registered, was not filing returns in England, and the corporate office threatened to strike them off. If you want that document, I will produce it for you, but I do not have it in my hand. Right? Just a minute. Just a minute. Right? No, I have a lot to say.
Mr. President, I rise again. Mr. President, if the honorable member, my colleague senator, does not have the document to be so it can be made available to this chamber, then he cannot continue to quote from some mystery item. But it's not a piece of chewing gum paper, Mr. President. He must either have it so people can peruse it, or he needs to wait until such a time that he can come here prepared for the other honorable members of this chamber to have the ability to see what he's quoting or speaking about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Franklin, if we pause for 5 minutes, will it help you to make it available to?
Sir, that is unnecessary. I can speak to a document in this house. I'm not breaching any rules. I am not reading from any document. I said I have a document in my possession that's make these suggestions. The government is uncomfortable with the whole topic of White Oak because they are ashamed because they have been found out that White Oak and the dealings that White Oak had with the government of Barbados is less than above board, less than transparent.
Point of order. Senator Franklin is misleading this House. I believe that the government of Barbados has clearly, in a very transparent way, communicated the relationship with White Oak. And for Senator Franklin to come in this chamber and to suggest that the government of Barbados is engaging in action under the table is incorrect. And I believe that the senator should withdraw those comments.
Mr. I appreciate the point of interruption, because that certainly wasn't a point of order. But I will continue. I have said, and I will maintain, because the document that the government laid in this House dealing with White Oak, when they said They, and I have that here, it is a document of this house already. That document was signed on the 1st of June by the Director of Finance. Let me pull it up here for you. The engagement letter from White Oak Advisory, 42 Brook Street, London, WK1, whatever, directed to the Director of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment. And it is dated the 30th of May. This company had all this information within 4 days and was able to write the government of Barbados within a very short time after the government change, when the cabinet was being put in place. These people had advanced knowledge before even the cabinet of Barbados, because there was no cabinet when these people were dealing with the government. And then it sets out the relationship and the fleecing that the government was going to put on Barbados, this company in Barbados was going to go through. And it was signed by the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs on the first day of June 2018, a mere couple of days after the government change. One, this is not the only company available in the world that can do this business. So if the government wanted to do something above board, they would have put it out to tender. And in accordance with the legislation that we passed here last year, and the one that existed previously, the only way you would do this is if they were one of a kind, and their services were unique. But we didn't do that. We went and select some people who eventually turned out fleecing this country, and there is a lot of defense about it. There should be a defense about it. There should be some resignations about it, because they breached everything in the financial rules. First of all, there was no cabinet to approve this. And then when there was no cabinet to approve it, there couldn't have been a contract of this nature. This isn't like a business that you're not setting up and you're having a pre-incorporation contract because you know what the business is going to be. No, these people were selected despite the government not doing due diligence, because if they had done the due diligence, we would have known that they were fly by night. And it has been exposed in the press, the foreign press.
Mr. President, there is a point of elucidation. Of the 14 sovereign restructurings done in the world since 2005, White Oak advised on 7, Lizards on 4, and City 1 on the others. It was therefore an obvious choice for Barbados. And so when the honorable member seeks to say that this is a fly-by-night company, that we knew nothing of this company, we would respectfully suggest that the honorable member do his research, and he might find precisely what I have just shared with him. And I would ask, Mr. President, that in light of him not having done that research, I do not imagine, sir, that he should desist from continuing down this line.
Senator, I've been advised that there was a response by someone on behalf of the government to the article that appeared in the Times of London about White Oaks. But I am wondering why that article wasn't circulated in Barbados, because it is the answer to all that is being said now. White Oaks is not a fly-by-night company. There's been 14 restructurings in the world in recent times, and they've been involved in 7.
Yep.
So if that is the fact, well, then it's misleading to refer to it as a fly-by-night company. Anyhow, go ahead. I'm only wondering if there was a response to the article. I've been reliably informed that there was a response to that article that appeared in the Times of London. Why is it not circulated in Barbados too? The people of Barbados have an interest in it. Go ahead, please.
Mr. President, again, sir. I saw the response from another fly-by-night who is a professor at Gresham College, a college that does not issue a degree, does not have a student, and you are a professor at that college. So I don't take much store in anything I hear from people like that. So let me get it straight. Anybody who wants it, you don't like checking myself, check Gresham College. It's a college established to do public lectures. And you're a professor, walking about this college, a professor, and no one come in and trick me. I want to hear from you. I don't believe anything they have to say. If they had anything to say, they should have said it up front before the government was caught with its pants down not by locals, but by the international press. And you're talking about due diligence here and returns and all kind of stuff. These people, if you had checked who you were dealing with, you wouldn't have gone to bed with them. No, I meant you if you were above board. So we are seeking to put requirements in place for us locals, but the government can deal with companies that breaching the laws that they are supposed to obey in England. And you are telling me that people can bring up on points of elucidation. You can only elucidate your speech, not mine. You know? Yeah. So I have great difficulty with what I saw, and it made me question how this government is behaving from day one, sir. This government going and I want to get the opportunity to deal with it because you have taken $27 million of our dollars and given it to two people for information that you could have done. Or you could have, use you. No, you're not going to use me. No, you use the people you're paying in Barbados. You have a whole lot of people in Barbados who you are giving consultancies to, who are who teach at university, who do all kind of stuff. But you don't trust the locals to do what these people claim that they have been doing. Don't mind them with that nonsense. 7 restructurings where? What are the 7 restructurings? In Grenada? St. Kitts kicked them out, didn't they? You were down there, so ask kids, kick them out, we bring them in here. What they kick them out for? Man. You know, but Mr. President, you know, I dearly love saying the comments, but you're going to ask her to bring it to order because she's misbehaving now.
The Secretary on his feet is entitled to be heard in silence.
Thank you, sir.
Very well.
Yeah. So this bothers me, and there must be more disclosure about this white oath. What I want to call it will not be parliamentary, so I will not say it. I'm always parliamentary. But something has to happen. Now that this information has come out, it makes me ashamed of the behavior that this is what you would do in a banana republic where the big boss comes and says this will happen, next thing will happen, and then without cabinet, without anybody, without even following the rules that you put in place. Where is the it used to be section 34, Senator Walker, where you, the financial rules where you, if you didn't have, it's relevant to this debate. I saw last week, I had last month or whatever, there was a debate about removing the name of the minister from the legislation, and you had a whole big debate about drugs. I can't get some latitude. I mean, in the next place, just wanted to remove the definition minister, and we had a definition, a thing about drugs, all kind of stuff. And you don't want me to mention white oak because white oak is an Achilles heel? Yes, sir. That is the government's Achilles heel. The government got into bed with these people without knowing.
That you want L or two?
Sorry, sir?
Order.
The government got into bed with these people. And the only reason I'm raising it, sir, is that we are seeking to put in place rules that these people fail to observe in their jurisdiction and be in bed with them. Enough said. The next thing, and I said I wanted to be brief, but they wouldn't let me. The shareholders of companies should be known. If you really want to be involved in detecting money laundering, I'm talking about private companies, because you know the shareholders of companies registered and are regulated by the stock exchange and stuff, you know who they are. But there are some companies that are owned privately and we don't know who the shareholders are. For instance, I can incorporate a company and name 2 people as directors, and nobody knows that I am the person behind the company. And I will tell the directors what I want them to do, and all the door will roll into me, and they will just sign off on me, and nobody will know it is my business. There is some attempt in the bill, let me get back to it here now because you were ordering me, to say that there will be a register of shareholders and that the company must maintain for 5 years, that the register must be maintained for 5 years. Beneficial ownership means the ultimate relationship. I'm trying to find it in the bill, yeah. And the register of shareholders shall be maintained for a period of not less than 5 years. But this is dealing with people who have held prominent public office. What about the fellows who didn't have prominent public office and they own half of Barbados and they do their business in cash? You know, a lot of businesses in Barbados who refuse to bring a check to the bank, but and people pay them with loads of cash. But they don't want anybody to know. I'm not going to call any names, but I know of instances where people have large sums of cash, way in excess of the $10,000, you know, and they don't bank it, and I don't know where it goes because they don't involve me. I don't know about the lawyers, sir. I'm not one. You would have to ask them. But these companies can be owned by a person who nobody knows, is involved in the affairs of this company, and they can do their thing behind the scenes. Prior to the Companies Act that is currently in force, the old Companies Act made provision that the shareholders should be, any change in the shareholders should have been notified to the registration department at the time, because it was the registration department who controlled the corporate office back then. And every time there were changes in shareholders, you had to make a return to the office. The Companies Act was repealed and replaced, I think it's in 1985, and that provision came out. It is time that it goes back in. And not only for prominent people, prominent political office, because we have some poor fellows who get political office and have to remain honest, they might remain poor. But we have people in this country who pull the strings from behind. Nobody knows who they are until they die, that they own everything, and they own all sorts of companies in Barbados. If you really want to have transparency and want to go by these standards that you're talking about, owners, I'm talking about the beneficial owners of all companies in Barbados should be returned to the register, to the corporate office, CAIPO they call it, and not just people like you who have prominent political office, or prominent, as they call it, prominent public office. Because I don't have prominent public office, so that wouldn't mean me. But that is one of my major concerns, sir. That if nothing else should be changed in this bill, if you're going to keep everything in place, that provision needs to go back into our corporate companies legislation. We have too many shadows, people standing in the back and controlling vast amount of money, and they're naming two little boys as directors, and they're doing their thing. It's been happening for too long. It started in 1985, and it's about time, sir, that we move to fix it. Right? I do not intend to proceed much further because sorry? No, I don't belong to any political party, Mr. Chairman, and even if I did, I'm of the executive. So I don't. But then again, why you have that there? Because that's a distraction.
What? No, are you addressing Senator?
No, I'm talking about the public office, prominent public office, where you are supposed to have those people registered. And the definition of prominent public office, it says that a member of the executive of a political party is one of these public officers. Job.
This is called privilege.
Pardon?
Privilege.
I don't know what it is.
What are you doing?
You know, that. So what is important? If you're going to have a little chairman of a party, or not chairman of a party, but the treasurer or the assistant secretary of the party and stuff, you're going to have them here. What about those people that own all, I was speaking about earlier, that own half of Barbados? No, we don't own anything. Anyhow, sir, I will not proceed any further in this matter. All I want, sir, is that government consider making the amendments that and I want it to be clear that owners of private companies, not the directors alone, the owners, the shareholders, should be their return should be made to the corporate affairs office, not kept in their offices. Because if you're doing a search, you're in front of their office, they're not going to let you in. It should be a matter of public record. And if the government grants me that, I won't beg for anything for a long time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I next recognize Senator Greenwich.
Mr. President, I actually thought that we were so close to the lunch hour that you were going to take it at this point. I think it is also sending a message to me that I should be as brief as possible and not delay the lunch hour of the honorable senators.
The problem is that I had no indication that it was ready.
Oh. But Mr. President, I want to begin by saying that over the last couple of months, I have noticed that this small country of ours is wrapping itself up in many rules and regulations. We are always being asked to comply with this and comply with that. And truth be told, Mr. President, if we want to be counted on the world stage, then we have to comply. We have no alternative at all. I know, sir, that some Barbadians may call it surrendering our sovereignty. And I think that that is a very discomforting way to describe what we are doing. But we have to admit, Mr. President, that what is being done here is indeed for the benefit of Barbados. And sir, we also have to agree that it is no use our trying to fight the EU, to fight the OECD, and to fight those other powerful international agencies. They are literally, sir, regulating everything we do. And there are international heavyweights. We can't fight against them. Small states like little Barbados, sir, must fall in line. We will lose the battle with them, sir, even before we start. It's no use pulling and tugging and saying that we're going to be into any tug of war with them. We may not like the way, Mr. President, that we are being asked to do these things, nor do we appreciate the pace at which we are being asked to do them. We are being pushed around, and we know it. But sir, truth be told, if we do not comply with their stipulated times and so on, we can be blacklisted, and we can be even excluded from international business. They will say that we are being uncooperative. So, sir, those international agencies and the powerful international countries of the world, they are not destroying small states like Barbados with guns and bombs and other ammunition and any kind of military supremacy whatsoever. That's a fact. But, sir, we have become victims of economic might, and that is clearly what it is. And that, sir, can do as much damage to small developing states like Barbados as military supremacy can. They're now asking us, sir, to make certain changes to make sure that certain things happen. Where the companies are concerned, sir, information relating to the beneficial ownership, and we have to get that straight, the beneficial ownership of companies must be made available to the public. And this information as to who the beneficial owner is or the beneficial owners are, that information must be readily available at the registered office of the company. And we have to admit, sir, that there are indeed certain persons who hide their money in companies, hide their money in companies' accounts. And then the company will deposit that money as money belonging to the company. Indeed, that company is owned by this beneficial owner or those two beneficial owners. Even the bank sometimes would not realize that they are receiving this money and that they could be involved in some kind of money laundering without even realizing it. It is indeed a fact that some companies are merely devices, nothing more, merely devices used by persons to carry out illicit transactions without having that individual responsibility, that individual liability, identity of those persons being exposed. That is why they're set up, and that is how some companies operate. And so, sir, it is section 172, I think it is, section 172 of the Companies Act. You must now say who the beneficial owners of your company are. And I say beneficial owners, let me make this point, as distinct from your directors. You put your directors down when you are applying to corporate affairs to set up the company. So the directors are there at corporate affairs already. We want to know who the beneficial owners are. Who are the persons you are fronting for? Put it in that term, and you'll understand what I mean. Where are these people from, and what their nationality? What is their nationality? And if we remove the corporate veil, whose face would we see at this company? If we remove that veil, who will be exposed? Who are the persons behind the company? It might not be Mr. Senator Franklin at all. And this information must be kept at the registered office of the company, and it must be made available when required. Where the charities are concerned, Mr. President, I have no problem whatsoever with charities coming under closest scrutiny. I have no problem with that. I have always believed, sir, that stealing from a charity is perhaps one of the most unconscionable acts a person could commit. Because by its very nature, Mr. President, and by its very definition, a charity is an organization designed to help the needy. These are organizations already trying to help people who are down and out. And of course, all Barbadians, being sympathetic people, Barbadians, you know, once it is something good, and it's a good project, it's a good cause, Barbadians would assist and contribute. But sad to say, Mr. President, it is not unusual for those who are the face of charities, not only in Barbados, but in this world, to take from the charity and take advantage of their position. So because of what a charity stands for, we may not suspect those who are involved with the organization. We may not suspect them of using the charity for personal gain. But sir, John Smith, he may be a trustee of the charity. He may have a personal account somewhere, and he may be making steady deposits, siphoning off money to that, from that particular charity into his account. We also have to admit, sir, that our charities in Barbados are not sophisticated charities as the world goes. Our little Cancer Society, or our little Alzheimer's Association, or our little Heart and Stroke Foundation, they're nothing when we put them on the world stage, the RSPCA and those things. Most of our charities, even in the Caribbean, I would say, sir, they are fledgling. But sir, in other parts of the world, there are some charities that are literally worth millions and billions of dollars and millions and billions of pounds. But nevertheless, we have to get on board, and we have to make the amendments which are being demanded of us. And so, according to the amendment in the Charities Act now, the trustees of charities must be made public. The full names of the trustees must now be given. Their addresses must be provided. Any property that they own must be revealed. and any politically exposed person who is on board the charity must be disclosed. Indeed, sir, I look at it, and I'm perhaps a little bit happy for another reason, where the trustees of these organizations are concerned. I used to be a trustee at St. Catherine's Cricket Club. And when I became a trustee, I only became trustee because there was a case coming up. And we were told that according to the St. Catherine's Constitution, the club could not sue on its own. It had to sue through its trustees. It could not be sued on its own. It had to be sued through its trustees. And when we checked, I was the president, but we realized that all the trustees had died about 10 or 12 years ago. And all the trustees of St. Catherine's had died long before. And therefore we had to appoint new trustees. But yeah, the point I'm making, not that I was ready to die, Mr. President. All had died, all of them had died. And I was made a trustee. But according to the Constitution. Now, I say that because I've noticed in recent times, even in matters coming before the law courts, one of the most difficult things to do is to find out who the trustees of certain organizations are. The organizations keep that to themselves. You don't know if they're dead like the ones at St. Catherine's were. You don't know what is going on, but you can't sue them unless you sue the trustees. In fact, I've known of a situation in the law courts where the trustees were sued, people sued and the trustees, and they lost the case because they sued the wrong trustees. I don't mean this, no, they don't mean that. But that happens. That happens. So making it possible now for people to know who the trustees are, I consider that to be a move in the right direction. Nowadays, too, I've realized that the word politician is a bad word. I've realized that, and it is indeed again sad to say that there are corrupt politicians in this world, all over the world. And Barbados, we can't claim to be the cleanest jurisdiction in the world where this is concerned either. The facts state otherwise, and we had our names splashed all over. Social media did us a lot of damage. But the impression given in certain pieces of legislation now, and at certain banks and so on, is that politicians stick out like a sore thumb. And that a politically exposed person is automatically a dishonest person. You do get that impression. And that a politician is a target. As a politician, sir, you are getting treatment now that is not nice. The scrutiny that your account is under is not nice. The attention your deposits get is not nice. And the questions you have to answer and the boxes you have to tick, that too is not, yes, it is not nice. It is as though once you enter politics, that you'll never be clean again. And I think that people have taken this whole question of politically exposed to the extreme. There are some of us in here who, a year ago, never anticipated that we would have been here. But now we are here, we are ethically challenged. It is so hard on us. What caused us to be ethically challenged? Because we are senators. And because we are senators, we are now politically polluted, is the only way I can put it. Yeah. And sir, it doesn't, I remember there's a case, I think it's going on even now in the United States of America. And it has to do with, not politicians, has to do with, I think it's about 2 actors who wanted their daughters to be going to particular universities and had some fraudulent records and so on done on their behalf, showing that they had got decent grades and so forth, when indeed they had not. And the people at the university, in fact, I think there's a little switch in it now, but the people at the university who took the bribe, nothing much was being said about them. You know, the focus on the actors and the mothers and so on, and not so much on the university. I think now that there's a coach or something that they are trying to bring some justice to him. But the point I'm making is that it is not only politicians who need the kind of scrutiny, but we get it. We get it. I would never forget when I was about 12, I think, let me see, it might have been in long pants. I might have been about 15 years old. And I was leaving church a Sunday. And an old lady, she might have been, she died years and years ago. She might have been in her 70s or 80s. And she caught up with me walking home. So I want to talk to you. So you hear this sermon that they preached today? Reverend Bradford it was. See, you talk about the woman at the well. I think that's what it was. And it has something to do with stoning the woman for committing adultery. And she said, you realize anything though? To stone the woman, very demanded. She said she couldn't commit adultery by herself. Very demanded. All I'm saying that to say is the whole question of these ladies with the grades at the university. I think the university who took the bribe and the coach or whoever took the bribe should also have a question to answer. They should have a case to answer. So, sir, I am going to wrap up. I say it's close to the lunch hour. My final statement on this is that I do believe, yes, mankind has become extremely greedy. And a lot of money laundering crime is being committed not by persons who have to steal to survive, not by those who have to steal, but by persons who already have and still want more, by persons who are already living large and still want to live even larger. So a lot of the amendments that we make are geared at people in that particular position, the ones who live large and want to live larger. And in that regard, I have no qualms whatsoever and no objection whatsoever to the amendments. I'm obliged, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I would, just how people ask me to disclose the information I have passed them on to the clerk. The letters, I've sent 3 letters to the clerk of Parliament that he can make documents of the House, which says from White Oak, saying that they did not trade in 2017, they did not trade in 2018, and the letter to struck off.
I think
I've made them documents,
you've
I've sent them to the clerk, so they're available.
Senator Holder?
On what do you stand?
I stand to a point of elucidation.
The chair did not make that inquiry of you. Please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
The batsman does not have to play at every ball, you know. Always remember that. Senator Holder? I think you'll be the last speaker before lunch.
Mr. President,
You're just,
I am aware of this position you've placed me in at this time, and so I shall be brief. I shall be brief. Mr. President, I wish to lend my support to the amendments before us and to make two simple points to justify why I would wish to support these amendments. You know, I sat here this morning and I listened to the opposition senator, and I remember asking my colleague if there wasn't a recent press conference, Mr. President, called by the opposition leader when the government, the country rather, was recently blacklisted by the EU. And we were unable to confirm the actual activity. But I know that I read somewhere in the press, Mr. President, some comments from the opposition about Barbados's blacklisting status by the EU. And as I sat here, I realized that there are those who will oppose for the sake of opposing. This seems to be the character, it would appear, of some humans. And Reverend Rogers can identify with me that even in ancient texts, this was the reality. There are those who just oppose for the sake of opposing. Because Barbados went through a process when it was blacklisted, and there was an outcry from certain quarters. The opposition led the charge even that all this Motley administration is not managing well, is not doing what it ought to. And if it was, then we would not be in this position. But here we are today, as we have been in the past, seeking to correct these issues by bringing the necessary amendments to our legislative apparatus that would allow us to comply. And yet, Mr. President, that has been opposed too. So I wonder sometimes, what is it that the opposition really is expecting of us? Maybe rhetorical, no need to respond. But, Mr. President, the facts are that Barbados, as I believe Senator Greenwich made the point, has to ensure it complies. The rules of the game have changed, and Barbados does not have any authority in determining those rules. We don't have the power to determine those rules. We have to try to play by the rules as much as we can. Now, that does not mean, Mr. President, I'm suggesting that we cede our sovereignty. But it is a fait accompli that if you're going to operate within the world system, if you're going to trade internationally, etc., that you must comply. You must comply with the rules of the game. And so, our efforts to do so with these amendments today, I believe, have even helped with a recent report that came out on the Bloomberg Tax website on May 10th, Mr. President, that suggested that Barbados, along with Aruba and Barbuda, will be removed from the tax haven blacklist by the EU. It is said on that site that come May 17th, when the EU finance ministers meet, that Barbados will be removed from the blacklist. And the site, Mr. President, noted that this is happening because of this administration's effort to amend its laws, this administration's effort to change the corporate tax laws. And yes, Senator Boyce, the senators on that side have been in agreement with us. They have supported the amendments that have come before this chamber, because we understand that this goes beyond the 21 of us, that this is about protecting the integrity of a country. This is about ensuring that confidence is returned and that we can trade in the international market. But I want to also, Mr. President, share a very important quote from this side. You see, the reasons why the blacklisting occurred in the first place have been cited as the EU wanting to ensure that there was what they call fair corporate tax criteria for companies, that they operate with some sort of economic substance. And by economic substance, what they refer to is that these companies do not have some sort of letterbox firm set up, that they can simply benefit from zero or low corporate tax rates. They want to make sure that there is economic substance, that there's actually a firm operating somewhere. They want disclosure, because of what may have transpired, not necessarily in Barbados, Mr. President, but what may have transpired in other jurisdictions. And so they sit and they make the rules for all the jurisdictions now to comply. And so Barbados had to do that. And thus our effort at the Charities Amendment Bill, the companies amendment bill at all, is to ensure that we bring greater transparency to this process. Now, Mr. President, who really would oppose this? Nobody should in their right mind oppose this. Not in their right mind, Mr. President. This is necessary to ensure that we are compliant. Now, truth is, what I would have loved to see, Mr. President, I would have loved to see that we go beyond the Charities Act and that we include non-profit organizations. I would have loved to see that, because I'm satisfied that there are several non-profit organizations operating in Barbados that also need to ensure transparency and good governance. Now, unlike the Barbados Workers Union and other, the larger trade unions that do have annual general meetings, and they are transparent, because why? They're taking subs and fees from scores of employees on a monthly basis, so they're transparent. But there are some trade unions and other non-profits, Mr. President, that are not so transparent. You have an organization of one. There's no annual general meeting. There are no audited financial statements presented to members. There's no transparency at all, so you don't even know what is going on and what is happening within those organizations. Right? So, Mr. President, I would have loved to see us go a little step further. And that is maybe something that we can consider going forward, especially when you have a large constituency. And I understand that there's some now that their constituencies are growing. Members are coming in droves. But we need them to make sure that there's transparency in their operations and accountability in their operations, Mr. President. So we need to go a step further, because this is important. This is important, right? I am aware, I heard of one leader who had significant deposits, scores and scores of checks and large sums of cash, walking around with, Mr. President, walking around with a big brown envelope. Mr. President, can you imagine? Of members' funds. And no financial statements being presented to members, so we don't know what's going on. Can you imagine?
What a shame.
This is happening, Mr. President, that this is happening. So I am of the view that we need to go beyond the companies, beyond the charities, and we need also to look at non-profits. And we need to make sure that we bring greater accountability, primarily because we are representing large constituencies. We are representing members, and therefore they have a responsibility to know that the organization that they're subscribing to, sending fees to, sending their subscriptions to, etc., on a monthly basis, that those organizations are also operating above board. Mr. President, I humbly submit that as my first point. So I agree that Barbados has to comply. It is important that we do so. And my second point, therefore, Mr. President, goes now to the Financial Services Commission. Because this is mentioned as well, and the acting leader of government business this morning spoke to seeking to bring the commission into best practice relative to how it operates. And there is a particular constituency of the commission that I would wish for it to pay attention to as we go forward, and that is the credit union movement. The credit union movement, Mr. President. You see, the credit union movement in Barbados has done well in being able to enfranchise ordinary people. As it is, at December 2018, the Credit Union League would have shared some data in their audited financial reports and so on that suggests in Barbados there are some 205,000 persons in the movement. And that is a 74% penetration rate in Barbados, I believe second only to Dominica within CARICOM. We are told that they have assets under management of 2.4 billion as at the end of December as well, and some 33 active credit unions. So when you think about this movement is making a significant impact, and not only the economic landscape of Barbados, but socially, because the average person from St. Lucie, St. Andrew, St. Peter, right through to St. Philip in Christchurch, St. John, the average person has been able over time to turn to this indigenous institution for access to credit, that they can save and they can access mortgages, they can access business loans, they can purchase their vehicles, etc., through credit from these organizations. The average individual who, there was a time in this country, as you know, Mr. President, you could not save within a commercial bank. The laws did not allow that. And they were able to turn to the credit union movement. So when we think about the impact of credit unions in Barbados, it begs the question, therefore, why is it that we have not yet been able to put in place deposit insurance for the credit union movement? Mr. President, deposit insurance is already in place, not only for the commercial banks, we know that, but for what is known as the other non-bank financial institutions, the Tier 3 institutions, regulated, I believe, by the same commission and maybe the central bank, as well as other trust companies. And so I am calling today that the Financial Services Commission, in its review and its efforts through this amendment to look at best practices and how it operates here in Barbados, to ensure that it complies with commissions the world over, that it also seeks to protect this very critical sector within our society and work with the credit union movement to put in place deposit insurance provisions that would allow our 205,000 persons that they can have some semblance of security. Mr. President, I'm not so sure how many persons in this chamber are credit unionists. But I know that the leader of opposition business is an ardent supporter of the credit union movement. I'm aware of that. So I'm aware that he would have served at the highest levels and the two top credit unions in this country. So I know that he will support my call today that as we look to amend the Financial Services Commission Act, that we broaden the scope and that we encourage that the Commission considers now protecting this critical sector within our society, as is the case, as I mentioned, for other non-banking financial institutions in Barbados. We have thousands of persons with deposits in the credit union movement. God forbid something happens. God forbid. I mean, the credit union movement has been well regulated and so on today, but we want to make sure that we can protect those depositors going forward. And so I'm calling for this consideration to ensure we can protect the credit union sector. Mr. President, I mentioned I'll make two points. So in wrapping up, I want to conclude as I commence that the game has changed. The world has changed. It is no longer business as usual. And so when we sit here, we cannot constantly opine that the government is trying to do too much, that the government is, pushing these amendments and there are too many. So we cannot continue with that retort. Each time the facts are that the international environment now has placed a requirement on us as a small island state to comply, to meet these targets, and therefore we have, and I believe, Mr. President, we must. So with those few words, I wish to signal my support for these amendments.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the sitting be suspended for 1 hour until 2:40.
Be now suspended for until 2:40 for lunch. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I'm afraid we're now under suspension until 2:40. Thank you.